I'll just go ahead and link to my previous video where I do a complete breakdown of all of the rune word changes in patch 2.6 because it really warranted its own video. And that's right, always be plugging to videos I literally just uploaded because I'm on that grind. Here I want to talk about the different content that's coming out of the ladder season and into other forms of gameplay, just so that people can kind of get caught up with what is now available. So the first big thing that's really important to understand, and I just see some confusion about this online, so I just want to cover it really quickly. All ladder content, so ladder rune words, ladder changes to be able to upgrade set items, etc., were all available in single player as well, as long as you weren't playing on a classic character. All of these things from season 1 have now rotated into non-ladder as well. So non-ladder players are able to make all of the rune words from ladder season 1, as well as able to upgrade set items in the Herodric Cube recipe. And while I find it interesting that they put Sunder charms first and then the change to terror zones, I just reverse those really quickly since Sunder charms only drop in terror zones. Terror zones as well, which were available both for ladder and non-ladder, are now coming to single player. And just highlight it right here, terror zones are now available in offline games. In addition to that, Sunder charms, which were a ladder only item, will now drop in non-ladder terror zones as well as single player terror zones. So not only will all of the season 2 ladder characters that currently have Sunder charms, which are rotating into the non-ladder pool of characters, have their Sunder charms, but when you're farming terror zones, you'll be able to drop them there as well. What's really interesting here to point out is that terror zones are actually going to be on a different rotation schedule than they are online. Basically what this means is that if you hit a really good terror zone online and you've always wanted to farm that on single player, or vice versa, if you're playing your new single player character once the patch goes live and you go, oh, Chaos Sanctuary is now terrorized, I should play that online. They're not going to be synced up. They have two different logics that are controlling which terror zones are currently active. To go even further, they've actually changed up what terror zones are actually in the list now. They've added a bunch and removed some. So in Act 1, previously only Darkwood would be terrorized, but now Darkwood along with Underground Passages 1 and 2 will all be terrorized. They've added back in the Black Marsh as well as the Hole level 1 and 2. The Hole is basically like the pit, but in the Black Marsh. And then lastly, in Act 1, when the jail is terrorized, the barracks is also terrorized. So going from the outer cloister waypoint into the barracks, then down into the jail cells is a route that you can take. When they first started terrorizing things like act bosses, there were a few hiccups when those drop tables were changed and they weren't always benefiting from the terrorized zone. I foresee the potential of the Smith, who is a boss down in the barracks, to potentially have some weird terror zone related drop table issues as well, but that is completely conjecture. I want to go farm him once it's terrorized just to see what he will drop, since he's supposed to drop from a specialized loot table similar to Griswold and Hephaestus. In Act 2, they finally added the Ancient Tunnels to the list of terrorized zones. This is really nice. Ancient Tunnels was an amazing place for cold builds to go since there are no naturally occurring cold immunes in that spot. In Act 3, they made the Great Marsh a terrorized zone. That means that all of us are going to have to figure out how to find the Great Marsh. All joking aside, if you actually don't really know how to get through your Act 3 maps, I'll go ahead and link a video right here as well that I recently went over your ability to be able to navigate them so that all of us can find our way to the Great Marsh and actually farm it once it becomes terrorized. Now that being said, the Great Marsh kind of stinks. The monsters in there are pretty bad, as well as having souls, which is not great. But at the very least, now there's a reason to ever go to that map other than getting frustrated and stuck at the end of it when you're trying to find your way to the Flayer jungle. When talking about really difficult to navigate maps, they've actually removed the Kuras sewers out of the rotation. Now, the Kuras sewers were an interesting option for terrorized zones, considering sewers level 2 actually has a bunch of super chests down in the bottom and could have a decent density of elite monsters spawning in the area. But it was so circuitous, you absolutely needed teleport, and even with teleport it was still really difficult to go around, so I think it makes sense that they removed the sewers, but there is some arguments to be made about not necessarily having to do this. And if I was being honest, I'd much rather run through the Kuras sewers than go find my way over to the Great Marsh. While they haven't changed anything in Act 4, Act 5 has some pretty interesting changes. They've added the Bloody Hills and the Frigid Highlands together. Previously, these were two separate terror zones, but now when this becomes terrorized, you can go farm Eldritch and Shank in a single farming session. In addition to that, they've added on the Abaddon. This is the red portal that you never go into in the Frigid Highlands, and we'll see another one of these red portals later on with the Pit of Acheron. The problem with this area is that the density in there is complete crap, the monster types are complete crap, and there's just a sparkly chest at the end, not even a super chest. So in all reality, I don't think there's any reason to really go in there at all, but at the very least, for the more adventurous people, it is an option. When Glacial Trail is terrorized, the Drifter Cavern is going to be terrorized as well, which is a really good addition. And then on Ariat Plateau, the other outdoor large field siege area in the Act 5 tundra, the Pit of Acheron will also be terrorized. This is another red portal, bad monster density, bad monster types, crappy sparkly chest at the end. I really don't see a reason to farm either of these areas, but again, it's always nice to have more and not use it than to have less and wish you did. Because we're talking about the terror zones, I also want to talk about the bug fixes that are coming to the terror zones as well. I'm just going to read it from this page because I haven't memorized all of these yet. They have fixed terrorized treasure classes for certain super unique monsters and bosses. Again, this is really important. There was an issue within Dariel with whether or not she was quest bugged, and the quest bug actually taking the spot of the terrorized drop, so you weren't actually getting the benefit of her being terrorized, depending on whether or not you had gone through intentionally quest bugging her or not. Because while the quest bug wasn't affecting her normal drop because they changed her normal drop table over to the quest drop table, the game still was recognizing whether or not the bug was quest for your character, and that was having different outcomes depending on which state you found yourself in. A real Schrodinger's cat experiment of whether or not you got GG loot. Here, I talked ahead of myself, but fixed an issue where an Act Boss's quest treasure class would sometimes be used instead of the terrorized treasure class. That's the thing I just explained. Fixed an issue where the current terrorized zone was not properly marked in the waypoint menu while using legacy graphics, and some people like playing with them, so I'm glad that it finally works for them and they weren't just missing out on a whole feature. And then fixed an issue with translations that appear when the pit is the current terrorized zone. Obviously that wasn't hitting too many people, but it's also nice that people who play this game in anything other than English are also getting the full functionality that they paid for. This one was a bit of a quick one, just want to cover over those changes. Again, terrorized zones and Sunder charms are now available in all game modes, regardless of whether or not you're online or offline, ladder or non-ladder. And the only caveat is that if you're playing on a classic character, you won't be able to get those items and participate in those challenges. So I'm glad that they made these changes. It's awesome that's coming to single player. That was probably one of the most requested things that I think wasn't getting a ton of the same traction or friction as some of the other quality of life changes, but it's really, really cool considering I'm a huge fan of the terror zones. I think they actually add some level of depth to the end game of Diablo 2, and I'm glad I'll be able to enjoy those when I inevitably have to do some silly challenge on a single player character moving forward. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.